humor ourselves a minute and actually talk about the game for a moment or
Sure.
two or three. But so the two things that I kind of look at as far as like, first of all, again, I think Kentucky's going to win this game by about, 18, 20 points. I don't think it's going to be particularly competitive. But the two things that I see that kind of stand out to me for Louisville in this game, number one is Brandon Huntley Hatfield matched up with Aaron Bradshaw. If Louisville has any prayer in this game, and Ugana Onyenso, who I assume is still, overcoming that flu-like sickness, whatever it was, played 9-10 minutes. It was an absolute force against Carolina on Saturday in Atlanta. But can Brandon Huntley Hatfield have the success he's been having against Bradshaw and Ugana Onyenso? I mean, that's been the discussion all season for Kentucky is how do they work the big guys back in? How do they work the big guys back in? Well, they work the big guys back in against Carolina. And yes, Armando Bacot hasn't been the same Armando Bacot this year, but they did a really, really, really good job on Armando Bacot. And can Huntley Hatfield have the same type of success against a Kentucky team that has found its interior defense by getting those 2 7-footers back and has rim protection now that they didn't have earlier in the year?
Yeah, and we were just talking about this, or I was mentioning to you, I think earlier that, Brandon Huntley Hatfield has been one of the 2 or 3 bright spots, impressive players for Louisville this season. And even the last 2 games in particular, I know this is taken into account an Arkansas State game that many people don't want to relive, but you look at Brandon Hatfield's individual performances, 23 rebounds across those 2 games, 4 blocks across those 2 games, 20 points in each of those games. He's emerging as a player that can be dependable for Louisville. Now, this will obviously be a completely different test against the most stern opposition around the basket that he's had this year. Something that I'm interested in seeing, kind of going along with that, acclimating the big men point from the Kentucky perspective that you introduced, is can Brandon Huntley Hatfield get Kentucky's bigs into foul trouble? One of the only reasons that Ugana Onyenso played so early in that Carolina game and so frequently in that Carolina game and did well in his minutes, especially given, returning from the foot injury, the surgery, having the flu symptoms, is because Aaron Bradshaw was in foul trouble. Picked up 2 fouls in the first half, sat pretty quickly, picked up, I believe, his 4th foul very, very early in the second half, had to sit again. You look at Brandon Huntley Hatfield, in terms of all individuals in college basketball, according to Ken Palm, he's a top 35 player in free throw rate. Now, him actually getting to the line and making those free throws, 75%,
you take that for a big guy. You absolutely take that. Yeah.
For a big man. And that's probably a way you can, and if I'm Kenny Payne and I'm drawing up a scouting report, that's one of the ways I think you can exploit Kentucky, especially early on, because you're still dealing with Ugana Onyenso working his way back into shape, hasn't been able to do a ton of practice work relative to his teammates. This is still going to be Aaron Bradshaw's 4th college game. He's still getting used to, not only his body, because he's more of, the finesse perimeter player, banging low on the inside, but just the speed of the college game. I know he was great against Penn, did some nice things against Carolina too, but this is all still a bit new to him. And then Trey Mitchell, Kentucky wants to operate him more as a facilitator. Maybe Brandon Huntley Hatfield, he's probably not going to win that experience battle when you think about 2 guys who have been around college basketball for a while. But, that's at least a lane, right, that Louisville can maybe try and do some good things. Now, part of the problem with that matchup is if Aaron Bradshaw starts hitting some 3-pointers as well. I'll be really interested to see how Huntley Hatfield can guard him on the perimeter, assuming that matchup does occur. But also, when you think about it on the other end, Huntley Hatfield, while he's not taking 3-pointers, and that's a good thing from the Louisville perspective because he can't make them, that significantly decreases, the kind of mobility that Aaron Bradshaw is going to have to defend him, just because he's a total non-threat from distance.
And I'll also add, I would say the only other time this year Louisville's gone up against a front line that's, that has the type of length Kentucky has was when they played Indiana, and he wasn't great in that game, facing up against Kel'el Ware, who's one of the better defensive interior players in the country. I mean, he only had 6 points, 3 of 9 shooting, 4 fouls, was in foul trouble that whole game. How he handles the length of those 2 guys is going to be really interesting as well. And, does JJ Traynor play? I mean, he's been beleaguered on by fans in a lot of ways over his time, but he's a guy that's been, if inconsistent, has the potential, stretch the floor, hit a couple shots, has been aggressive, hasn't been scared of the moment, to where, they really could use him against Trey Mitchell to kind of help out with that matchup, even though I think Mitchell could kind of body him a little bit, down low, because JJ's not exactly the thickest guy, I'll put it that way. But the two things I look at, you mentioned it with the free throw shooting. Louisville's best offense is getting the free throw line, and that's
Right.
something that they've been really, really good at against almost everyone they've played. And I see, if Huntley Hatfield's able to get Bradshaw in foul trouble, that's a big key. If Ty-Laur Johnson's attacking down the lane, I want to see, because in Kentucky's loss against UNC Wilmington, I think that's a better comp because yes, RJ Davis torched Kentucky for what was it, 28 on Saturday. Louisville, Louisville doesn't have an RJ Davis. They just don't. Yeah.
You look at a team that's shooting 29.4% on threes, even 47.3% on twos. Like,
right.
I mean, as much as John Calipari likes to say, oh, this guy never makes shots, and all of a sudden, against us, he's met, which to be fair was true for Cormac Ryan against him on Saturday.
Cormac Ryan has a very long
Right, yeah.
track record of being a really good shooter, though. So,
But
I'm not giving him that one for Cormac Ryan.
Relative to this season, relative to this little period of games for him, at least. But I mean, against Louisville, you're probably going to take your chances on that happening.
Oh, absolutely. But
team that accounts for more than 25% of its points from the foul line. The modus operandi for Kentucky in this game should be do not send Louisville to the foul line, and especially for the bigs, do not get in foul trouble early.
Modus operandi, what a writer thing to say on your end. but kind of the point I was getting at the reason I bring up Wilmington, not just because Kentucky lost the game, where they struggled in that contest was that one-on-one, they couldn't defend Wilmington. And Wilmington's not exactly, that's not RJ Davis or Carolina. That's not Kansas. They're a fine mid-major team, but that's when you look at just the talent on each side, you would look at it and say, Justin Edwards, you should be able to stay in front of the sixth man on UNC Wilmington. Wagner, Dillingham, they really, really struggled guarding one-on-one in that game. And Louisville's a team that plays a lot of one-on-one. They like to try to beat you off the dribble and get to the foul line. If Kentucky's one-on-one defense, individual defense, which has not been good so far this year, if they struggle on that end and Bradshaw and Onyenso either aren't blocking shots or are in foul trouble, that to me is the only way Louisville stays in the game. And now that still doesn't answer the question of how do they defend Kentucky on the other end, because the answer is probably they don't. But on an offensive end of things, that to me is how they could possibly have a slim chance of keeping it maybe competitive.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned about the one-on-one defense, and especially in that Wilmington game. I mean, Cal said it ad nauseum in the press conference afterward about, guys opening up their hips, not being able to stay in front of the ball. He, lobbed a couple of grenades in the direction of some of the guards for their defensive capabilities.
Are you talking about Cal after that game or KP after Arkansas State?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Because they said the exact same things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm looking at a guy like Ty-Laur Johnson, 31.1% assist rate this year. 4 more assists in 6 games this year. He's the only player on Louisville with a meaningfully positive assist to turnover ratio. I think Mike James has like a +1, but that's, basically a wash when you look at Ty-Laur Johnson. And he's a young player, obviously you can't be expecting too much from him. And it's probably not fair to put him in a position of having to carry the Louisville offensive facilitation in this game. But that is kind of the role that he's in, or like the role that he's going to have to play if this massive upset's going to happen. Do you think at this early stage of his college career, he's going to be able to have that penetration and make the correct decisions to kick out the ball? And B, do you think Louisville will have enough offense surrounding him from the Sky Clarks and Trey Wrights of the world to actually take advantage if Ty-Laur Johnson's able to beat Kentucky off the dribble enough and get into the lane and, kind of initiate some secondary actions?
First of all, Ty-Laur Johnson's the only true point guard on the roster. And he's the only dude, as you said, that's a good facilitator that can set other people up and get into the lane, create offense for himself, and really, really, really do it well for others. And on the defensive end, he's by far their best perimeter defender. He is. He'll be the one when Rob Dillingham checks into the game off the bench. I would expect Ty-Laur Johnson to be guarding Rob Dillingham. That's, and I don't think he's going to be able to do it, but he's the only guy that'll put in the consistent effort, and he's going to make Dillingham at least battle some, unlike a lot of the other players when they defend on the perimeter. I think Ty-Laur is your best hope in that aspect, and I think that's kind of the way of putting it on both ends of the floor. He's your best hope. Do we think he's going to be able to do it? Probably not. But he's shown in small sample sizes against Texas, against Indiana, against Virginia Tech, that he can beat people off the dribble. He can get into the lane. And I don't think he can do that enough to be able to have Louisville actually win the game or stay super competitive. But I think there will be moments where he will be able to do that against Kentucky's guards as well, because he's been able to do it against everyone they've played so far this year. And I don't think, as good as Kentucky is, they're not great on the defensive end, especially on the perimeter right now. And that's something to where I think that they can't. I know I'm saying I think a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ty-Laur was able. Yes, he'll struggle with turnovers because he is a freshman. You know, he gets over aggressive, he makes those mistakes, but I do see a world where he's able to get into the lane and make some stuff happen for Louisville in that game. Do I think it'll be enough? No, but that is in my opinion their best offense in that game, as it is in pretty much every game. Just him or BHH on the block.
Right. In Kentucky, and KP touched on this in his presser this morning, of Kentucky just being a team, A, with a lot of depth, but B, specifically with a lot of scoring depth. Kentucky's got 6 guys averaging double-digit points. You know, obviously part of that's Aaron Bradshaw, who's only played 3 college games. But when you look at the Kentucky roster, there's a long list of guys who can realistically say, oh, this guy might go for 15 points tonight. Oh, this guy might chip in 12 or 13 points tonight. You know, a Duthiero might come up with a Kansas-type performance on any given night. When you look at this Louisville roster, I mean, obviously we have the injury question about JJ Traynor, Dennis Evans. You know, KP wasn't committal this morning one way or the other on if they would play. But aside from some of the guys we've talked about already, is there anyone that you think could sprout up with an 11, 12-point game and show some capabilities against a top 10 team?
Well, I mean, Sky Clark will shoot the ball a lot. I mean, he's a high volume guy, but he'll, you know, score his 13, 14, 15, 16 points. He always does. Well, not always, but like you can count on him to be, you know, it's almost like the Monte Ellis thing where, like, yes, even the bad teams performance. But even the bad teams score 90 points, and of those 90 points, someone's going to have 25. Like that's kind of what I feel like Sky Clark is in some of these games. But I mean, Mike James is a guy that's been averaging 13, 14 per game the last stretch. You know, I talked about with Coach Lieberman about a month ago, saying, okay, he had the big game one, then he kind of fell off a little bit. Can he find himself? He kind of has right at the chip from that aspect a little bit. So like Louisville offensively has been better, I think is a good way of putting it, with like a question mark. For me, it's just I don't see how they defend Kentucky. Yeah. Like I mean, they struggle defending the 3. They struggle cleaning up possessions with the rebounding on the defensive glass, taking the Texas game out of it. They struggled, you know, with communication. I think Kentucky's going to torch them and offensively. It might be a good over bet. I'm not sure they've released the over under at this point when we're recording, but I do think, you know, Kentucky's going to race out to a big lead. They'll take the foot off the pedal, and all of the stuff we've discussed over the last 12, 13 minutes might not end up mattering all too much, because I think Kentucky's going to win fairly easily. So, I mean, you agree with that sentiment, right? That Kentucky's going to win this game fairly easily.
Yeah, and it's certainly interesting you brought up the 3-point shooting percentage. It's funny because like Louisville, you know, obviously is not a good 3-point. It's not a good basketball team. Let's just say that. They're not a good offensive team. They're not a good defensive basketball team. You know, they're just not good. One of the strong points, if you could say that, for Louisville this season has actually been 3-point shooting defense. Opponents are only making 28.7% of shots against them.
That's one we've talked about that a lot on this podcast.
I was gonna say that number's about to go way up. All right, if I know that's about to go way up this week or following Thursday's game. Not only because of the volume of shots Kentucky makes, but just the shooters that Kentucky possesses. I mean, you can pretty much close your eyes and see pretty easily a bunch of different guys. Antonio Reeves, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, all going, you know, 4 of 6, 3 or 5 from 3-point range if they get the license to do so. And if anything, from a Kentucky perspective, given how porous Louisville's defense often is, and given some of the potential depth and size mismatches that Kentucky has, if a player like JJ Traynor and Dennis Evans aren't able to go and contribute meaningfully, this feels like a nice, cushy spot for Justin Edwards to finally have a breakout game. I know that was kind of the focal point of Cal's radio show on Monday, was almost reassuring people, hey, sometimes, you know, the freshman breakout doesn't happen within the first 8 to 10 games of the season. You know, it kind of has to happen on a different timeline. If there's any moment for Justin Edwards in particular, who really hasn't had his headline performance yet, to start building some confidence leading into SEC play, this feels like a great opportunity for him to be the kind of aggressive player that Calipari has tried to instill the confidence in him to be at the college level. He's flipped him and Reeves on the baseline 3-point lines so that Edwards can get to his left easier, Reeves can get to to his right easier. This feels like a chance where that kind of thing could happen, and you could get a guy who hasn't had a breakout performance yet really, stamp his authority on the college game against a Louisville team that could be taken advantage of.
Unfortunately for Louisville fans, it wouldn't be the first time that has happened in this rivalry. I mean, I remember Ty-Laur Hero had his against much better Louisville teams than this too. I mean, Ty-Laur Hero had his big breakout game against Louisville a couple years ago. Tyler Eulis in the game with the 38-1 team and a Louisville team that was undefeated, ranked in the top 4 at that point, was the difference maker in that game as a freshman. So it wouldn't be the first time from that standpoint. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, no, on the 3-point shooting defense for Louisville, this is going to be my last point. This is something that Coach Lieberman and I talked about a lot. I mean, yes, they're getting misses, but you look at a lot of the looks they give up. Yeah, especially they're good looks. Like especially the Indiana game. It's a total facade that Louisville's 3-point defense was good when IU was 1 of 11 from 3 in that game. The Texas game, Texas is a really good 3-point shooting team. They were, I think, 2 of 17 or something in that game, but they uncharacteristically missed a lot of wide open threes in that one. Virginia Tech, not a great shooting team. Ironically, the one dude that hit, I'm blanking on his name, hit, I think, 3 of their 5 threes, was 3 of 3, hadn't hit one all year, but the rest of the team was like 2 of 20, something like that. But a lot of those looks were wide open that they missed. And so I think Louisville's been playing with fool's gold a lot on the perimeter, and I think that could definitely end in a very painful way on Thursday night. So that's all we got here. We kind of went on, we've gone for almost an hour and a half here, so I feel like this is a good stopping point. Cam, really appreciate the time. I know you'll enjoy your first trip for a Louisville, Kentucky men's game inside the Yum Center on Thursday night. Hopefully they keep it a little bit more competitive than we expect for you, give you something interesting to write about. And I'm sure win, loss, whatever the heck happens, John Calipari will have some interesting things to say on Thursday night about Kenny Payne.
Regardless of what happens actually on the court on Thursday night, there will be a lot to take away from this game. They could roll out there and play a 40-20 basketball game reminiscent of King Kelly Coleman back in the day, and all these old just looking at the crowd is going to be a fascinating reveal. Seeing how Kenny Payne is greeted. Seeing what everyone says in the post game, seeing if he puts his foot in his mouth again, seeing a way that Calipari says this Louisville team runs good stuff. There's going to be a million takeaways from this game, and that's before we even worry about like where the ball is going on the court. Yeah, Calipari is going to break out every Cal-ism stereotype about Louisville. Yeah, someone needs to make a bingo card of they're young, Kenny's building, he's doing the right things, they're not robots. He's going to hit everything trying to, they're friends. That's what he's going to do, of really trying to pump Kenny up and try to help him out as much as he can. I just don't think the Kentucky head coach is not exactly the voice of reason I think Louisville fans will be looking for from that standpoint. Make sure there's a free space in the bingo card for Cal bringing up his UMass teams. The free space is Kenny Payne won those games. Anyways, for Cam Drummond, I'm Jack Grossman. We'll be back here. Special edition coming up in a couple of days here on Floyd Street's Finest. Until then, we'll catch you next time.